Well, again, good morning to you, and I'd like for us, if you would please, to turn our attention to Philippians, the second chapter, the first through the eighth verses. And of course, I will write it for us. So we want to look today at Philippians, the second chapter, the first through the eighth verses. We are continuing our Lenten series this morning, and I think this is a very important passage of Scripture from the Apostle Paul to the Philippians, found in the second chapter of Philippians. Now listen for the word of the Lord. If you've gotten anything at all out of following Christ, if his love has made any difference in your life, if being in a community of the Spirit means anything to you, if you have a heart, if you care, then do me a favor. Agree with each other, love each other, be deep-spirited friends. Don't push your way to the front. Don't sweet-talk your way to the top. Put yourself aside and help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Forget yourselves long enough to lend a helping hand. Think of yourselves the way Christ Jesus thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status, no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a slave, became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life and then died a selfless, obedient death. And the worst kind of death at that, a crucifixion. Death on a cross. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So, again, here we are. Slab dab in the middle of our faith, we have an event. The epicenter of our spirituality, the climax in many ways of our religion, we have an event. This event being the cross. So in the Lenten tradition of self-evaluation and contemplation, we've been using this event to spiritually reflect. And we've been asking ourselves a few questions as we think about what the cross means to us in our own life and in our own sense of spirituality, what the cross means for our faith. We've asked ourselves a couple of questions, and they may be for us a little unorthodox, but I think they're important. We've asked ourselves, what does it mean to have such a violent act in the middle of our faith? And which ways have we as a church and as an individual participated in that violence? So we're self-reflecting. We're evaluating who we are as an individual, as a society, as a church. We've asked ourselves, what does it mean to have a poor and lowly Jesus represented on the cross? And how should that image of Jesus inform our faith and our action in the world? Again, we're self-reflecting. We often think of Jesus, and rightfully so, as victorious, as risen, as glorious. However, at the epicenter of our faith, we have this Jesus poor and pitiful, devalued, belittled, humiliated. What does that mean for us to have that Jesus at the epicenter of our faith? And how does that inform us in what we do and in our actions in the world? And today I'd like us to consider this question. What can we learn from the great humility and compassion and sacrifice of Jesus and the cross? What can we learn from that? In verse 7a actually, is where I want to focus today. So, verse 7a, from this particular translation, and this is the Message translation, I like to read it for clarity, and particularly when we're reading in a group that we all don't have text in front of us, it's easier, I think, to comprehend audibly. So in this particular version, verse 7a, it says that Jesus set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a servant or a slave. The traditional King James translates that verse, he made himself of no reputation. And other versions, such as the NIV version, which is very popular, says he made himself nothing. So here we have, he set aside the privileges of deity to become human, to become a servant. Or we have, he made of himself no reputation. Or we have, he made himself nothing. All of those interpretations or translations of the original Greek are incorrect. When you look at the original Greek word, and there are some versions of the Bible who actually translate it this way, it reads, he emptied himself. He emptied himself. Now, I won't even begin to write it in the Greek, but what I will do is write it in English for us. This particular word is E-K-E-N-O-S-E-N, okinosen. It's the Greek word okinosen used here. And literally the Greek word okinosen only occurs one time in the entire biblical text. So here, just as a reminder, we know that the Old Testament is the oldest and most original texts that we have are written in Hebrew. And the New Testament, the oldest and most original texts that we have are written in Greek. And so when we speak to the original languages, as far as what we have in written form today, when we're talking about the Old Testament, we're talking about understanding the Hebrew language. And when we're talking about the New Testament, of course, we're referencing the Greek. So when you look at this particular word in the Greek, it's the Greek word ekinosen. It only occurs one time, and it's in this particular passage in which the Apostle Paul is trying to articulate to the Philippians really what is happening or what was happening on the cross. So in Paul's attempt or efforts to really try to explain what Jesus was going through, what was this process that was happening, when you see this poor and lonely and pitiful and devalued Jesus, he's not a victim. I think that's one of the most powerful understandings of the cross. Though he is being victimized, and there's a difference, he is not a victim. What's the difference? It is your own self-determination. You can't always control what someone does to you, but you certainly can control how you respond to it. So, though Jesus was being victimized, Jesus was not a victim. In last week's text, we looked at the gospel, I believe it was the Gospel of John, in which it states Jesus gave up his spirit. It was not taken from him. Jesus gave up the spirit. And he uses in the word there, he says, it is finished. And we have often heard that. That comes from the Greek word tetelestai. The word tetelestai is what an artist might use after a masterpiece, is what a composer might use after composing something masterfully on sheet music. They would say, tetelestai, it is finished. I did it. Wow, look at it. This is the Greek word used here in describing what Jesus did. It is finished. Here, Paul uses a Greek word that means he was active in the process of the cross. So Jesus was not an inactive, passive participant or victim of the cross. He was an active participant of the cross. And in fact, there was something happening on the cross. What is this active process? Jesus was emptying. So he was not made nothing. He didn't simply set aside privileges. I think those English translations to make it usable and accessible to us, I think are too weak. I like going back to the original Greek word here, in which some versions of the Bible actually translate it a little closely to the original language, and it is ekinosen. He emptied himself. So the lesson this morning is very simple. In order to be filled with the grace and power of God's love, we must first empty ourselves of the other junk that's taking up valuable space. In order to be filled with the grace and the mercy and the power of God's love, we must first empty ourselves of all that stuff that occupies our minds and hearts. Ephesians 5:18, from the original King James, it may sound familiar to you, says this: "And be not drunk with wine, wherein in excess, but be filled with the Spirit." The Message translation says it this way: "Don't drink too much wine, that cheapens your life. Drink the Spirit of God, huge draughts of Him." So, I want to pause for a moment and ask you, what might be filling us up? What kinds of things take up too much space? What can we do about it? And feel free to use personal examples. Okay? What do you think? What's filling us up? Taking this idea that in order for tetelestai to happen, in order for the great masterpiece to be finished of Jesus' life, Scriptures say, particularly Paul here says, he empties himself to reach that point. As we are looking at our lives, the great masterpiece of our lives, walking out God's plan for us in our lives, we too must empty ourselves. But what do you think might be filling us up? Yes, stuff, all right?
One thing that I do when I get up in the morning is I'll go check my computer to see if I've got any crises with clients or whatever. So, I mean, I'm supposed to do that. I need to do that. Okay. But my clients are in pretty good shape. So there's hardly ever a message from a client. But there's junk on there, and all of a sudden I'll start, and looking, and an hour and a half later, I've just totally wasted time. So I now look at just my BlackBerry to check to see if I've got any messages from clients, and then I go about my day. I'm pulling myself, and I mean, I've never been one that stayed on the computer very much, except that, hour or so in the morning. It's like, I don't want to waste my time there.
It's nothing of, I'm
Value.
guessing, of value, right?
Right.
So it's just stuff,
Right.
okay? Yes.
Right now, there's a conflict in my family that has my mother extremely worried, and every night when I call her, I have to hear about it, so then I worry about it too. I feel like, I should worry, I should be concerned, but I don't want to be overwhelmed by it.
So worry, anxiety fills us up. Right? No room for grace and love and joy and peace because we are filled with other stuff. Someone else, what might be filling us up, taking up too much space?
Past history.
Past history, yeah.
Bringing it forward.
Absolutely.
Not letting it go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He say, she say, he did, she did.
And you go,
Right.
oh, finally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Finally, possibly.
Yeah.
I think a sad thing of the lived experience is that everyone doesn't get there. It breaks my heart to think that there are some people.
I'm so sorry.
No. God's calling us. It's okay. Yes.
Well, when you're worried about the past or you're anxious about the future, you're not living in the now. Because
Absolutely.
You're in a time that does not exist.
Absolutely. When you're worried, I want to make sure we heard that. When you're worried about the past, and we've, I think, brought this up in class a couple months ago, or you're so tied up in knots about tomorrow, then you're missing the only gift you have, which is right now. Right?
That's why they call me the president.
Absolutely. The present is a gift. The gift of right now. It's the only thing that's real. I don't know if we can wrap our minds around that. The only thing that's real is right now. You can't do a darn thing about yesterday. And all of the woulda, coulda, shouldas, what ifs of tomorrow are not real. It's not real. What might happen, what could happen, it's not real. What only thing that is real is in this very moment, the breath you have right now. It's a gift.
One of the things that I always tell my clients, because that's one thing that as when you're a counselor, you deal with a lot of the past or future with people. And one of the things that I always tell them is that worry about the past functions as a tool if it's to think about it to teach us a lesson. What what did I learn from this? Do I need to do anything to make amends? How can I prevent this from happening again? And once you've got that, then you don't have to worry anymore. You don't have to think about it anymore. And then anxiety about the future, well, that serves a purpose in the very short term also to plan. Okay, well, let's see. I'm tight on money, so I need to take my lunches this week, or I have a family issue, so I need to figure out how long I'm going to listen to this, or if I'm going to listen to this, or what can I do, or can I do nothing about it? And then once you have got a plan, then you come back to the now. So they serve short-term purposes. I think they were emotions given to us for a reason, but we abuse them and overuse them.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have said in this class before that emotions are energy in motion, and they are meant to move, right? If you feel something, it's not bad that you're feeling it, but let it move through you, serve its purpose, do what you need to do with it, but let it move. It's when you hold it that it creates ulcers and stress and panic attacks and all kinds of stuff, right? Don't hold it. Breathe through it. A few things that might be filling us up. Undone or unfinished relationships. There's nothing that can fill you up like a relationship that you feel like is undone in some way. Like you didn't get to say what you needed to say. You feel like there's not closure. You feel like there's no resolution in some way. That can fill us up. Old emotions from childhood, from yesterday. You know, how many of us have gotten to traffic or an argument or something and then gone on to the next stop of the day, and you're carrying that emotion of the car accident or the argument with a coworker or whatever. You're carrying that emotion. So it can be an emotion from an hour ago or an emotion from decades ago. But when we carry those old emotions into the present, into the new situation, it fills us up. Leftover memories. Some of us in life are plagued by bad memories, and some of us are hindered by good ones. We talked a little bit about that some time ago, the good old days, right? Can't quite get on with living today's life because we are caught and trapped, shackled even by memories of the good old days. Or sometimes we are so filled with the culture of this world, which is consumerism, that a culture that constantly tells us to self-feel, that we are distracted from the true act of spirituality, which is to self-empty, that we may be filled with God's grace and mercy. If you soak up the messages of the world, newspapers, magazines, commercials, billboards, it's all consumerism, right? It's rare to find one space in the public world in which you are not being bombarded by something telling you to buy me, choose me, use my service. Fill yourself up with stuff, literal stuff. That we forget that the true act of being a spiritual being in the world is to self-empty of that stuff that we may be filled with God's love.
It's so easier said than done. I mean, even religion, this church, it's all done physically, materially, financially. So here we speak one thing, and yet you speak of doing something else. Very, very different.
Now, the spiritual act of generosity and giving is very different than consumerism. And we have to, as a spiritual body, as a people of faith, as a church, have to be careful not to cross the line. Spiritual giving is it's a selfless act, right? We give to the church because we believe in the programs of helping children, the food pantry, the prom ministry that was just here, right? It's a selfless act, not that we are getting something in return. Consumerism says, buy my product and you'll be sexy, or you'll be young again, or or all the ladies will love you, or, right? So consumerism is self-filling, buy me so you can get something. The spiritual act of generosity is give of yourself, empty of yourself, that others might be a participant in God's love and grace. And I am by no means suggesting that the church doesn't cross the line at times, because there are many churches across the world that could fill this room with examples of how we get so caught up in consumerism that we bring that mentality or that energy into the church. Where giving is supposed to be selfless, consumerism is really selfish, right? I'm going to buy this, get this, and it'll make me feel or be something in the world. That's what advertising does. It tries to get your attention and prove to you that my product is going to make you feel something, right? Be younger, feel better, have a great life, whatever, right? That's what marketing does, right? Use me and you'll get something, right? Buy me and you'll get something. That's what marketing is. And there's a place for it, I suppose, but not in the church, right? And we have to be reminded that we are in the world, but not of the world. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm trying to get a point across, and I'm not trying to negate anything you're saying.
No.
I don't mean this at all. You're right on, but what I'm saying is, I think there has to be a more general, where it encompasses what we do for a living, what we're striving for financially, new technology. So when we speak spiritually, I'm speaking personally, to me, the only thing I can think of is let go and let God. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I do know what I'm not supposed to do. And where I end up, but when we try to break up this marketing, you know, you can't do it because we're all involved in it. This is our society. So when you try to differentiate the two, nobody's ever been able to explain that to me where I agree with.
Now, I don't believe you were a part of the class yet, but I said probably a year ago I did this lesson on dualism, and I don't believe in duality. And that's controversial in some ways. I don't believe in black, white, and there's never any gray. I believe that that's a very Western idea, and Christianity is an Eastern religion. And the idea that it's all a continuum, it's all connected, it's cyclical and not linear. Okay, not to reteach that, but that's what that means. So I'm no means trying to say black, white. Consumerism is all bad. Only giving and never expecting anything in return is all good. Therefore, we must choose good and not. I hope I'm not articulating it in that way. I believe it's connected, but I believe, as you said, and I'll share a story in just a minute. I'm trying to move myself away from personally, something is all good, something is all bad. Therefore, in order to not feel guilty and beat up, I need to be in the all good. And so I'm trying to move myself personally into as we're doing in this lesson, I hope, is being self-reflective. What do I feel about it, right? And I'll give you an example. I have recently accepted a job in the corporate world. Now, that's very different from anything I've ever done. I've never been corporate before.
You're not leaving here.
No, not any time in the near future. But I teach, for those who don't know, I teach on the university level, but I do that on a part-time basis. And I do consulting on the other part of what I do, so I can live in this world of goods, right? Consumerism, right? Because when it comes time, for my car note or my phone bill, AT&T doesn't want to hear about my spirituality, right? So now, there's a way of thinking in the world that, oh my gosh, you're selling out and becoming corporate. You've been involved in the church, and you've been involved in philosophy, and you've been involved in education and all these really noble causes. And there are people that I know in the world who would look down on me for taking a corporate job. But the fact of the matter is, my largest consultant client, I lost that client, pulled out, and 60% of my income went away. And so I got to do something, right? So I'm moving away from this is good, that is bad, and moving into it's all connected. God, where is the greater good for me in my life? And what feels right for me right now? Right? And so, by contrasting that there is this ultra, uber consumerism in the world, I think that that is a truth. I think we can see it and feel it. You just walk out the doors and go up and down the tollway, right? I think it's probably coming back this summer, but there was a billboard on the tollway not long ago that said, you know, if you want your wife to be hot, call this plastic surgeon or something. It's just like, it's just ridiculous, right? That doesn't feel good to me, right? It just doesn't feel like it's integrity. But I dare not say all marketing is bad. In fact, I love ads. I probably, if I could do it over, would have majored in advertising. I think they can serve a purpose in the world. Anyone remember the old AT&T commercial and the soldiers calling home and they're crying, like, right?
Yeah, everybody's crying.
Everybody crying. So Indeed is trying to sell you AT&T phone services, but it also served a great purpose for a lot of people. So I'm not trying to say that all capitalist endeavors are bad. It is the world in which we live. But I am saying that our sense of spirituality ought to be a little red flag when we see things like, you know, if you want your wife to be hot, call me. This idea that you are somehow imperfect and you must fix yourself to look like some unreal image.
And that a man has control over his wife.
Absolutely, right? So that, right? So, right. So there are, right? And so, amen. We can adjourn right there. Right? So I'm just suggesting to us that there is a sense of corporate consumerism that we must be aware of. But I'm by no means saying that all corporate marketing is something bad. And so I use my own example that I'm entering that world in the next few weeks. So if I thought it was completely evil, I don't feel like I could be a part of it. So it's not completely evil, but there are red flags, right? That at some point when you feel like, that doesn't feel right. I'm trying to move myself personally away from this is a list of do's and this is a list of don'ts. I think that's the law. And I think, as it says in, I think, the book of John, the letter killeth, but the spirit gives life. What's the spirit of something versus a list of do's and don'ts? So I'm not trying to create a list of don'ts, like consumerism is all bad. You know, we all have on clothes, we bought them, right? We all drove here in cars, I would imagine. We bought them, or we're purchasing them. So I'm not trying to create that dualistic, this is bad, this is good. But I am saying that the culture of the world is uber consumerism. And we must be sensitive to that we're not filling up with stuff to make ourselves feel good and worthy and happy, but that comes from a deeper place. This, for me, is the blessing of prayer and connection with God. This is the beauty of worship and study. It is an act of emptying. When we pray, prayer doesn't do a thing to change God. And we have been often taught incorrectly that prayer and fast and all that is a way to twist God's arm. Right? Prayer changes us. Meditation changes us. It doesn't change God. It empties us. Our worship, right? And I've often been a little snide about the way we Protestants worship. We come in for a show. We sit, we want someone to entertain us, and we clap nicely if they sang well, right? And we are waiting for somebody to entertain us. Worship is an act of emptying. It's a deep connection with the divine. It's not a Broadway show, right? These have been given to us to empty ourselves of all the stuff that fills us. Our spirituality is a process of digging deep, heart searching, which is why I love this class, because you allow me to bring up questions and have conversations like this and like we've had in the past, that it's just not a very surface black and white, right? Spirituality is a process of digging deep, of heart searching and active participation that stirs our very soul and here's the word of Lent, challenges our sense of security and comfort. If our spirituality is not challenging us, I might be willing to suggest we need to alter it in some way. Church and spirituality and study and circle groups and Sunday school is not to make us feel good all the time. It is to challenge us, make us think. There aren't always easy answers. The gospel is so simple, but the Bible is a complex book. And anyone who tries to teach it otherwise, I think, is misleading us a little bit. Anything worth really thinking about ought to be wrestled with, right? Right? Ought to be wrestled with. Think. And I saw Wilshire Baptist Church, which is in Dallas with Mockingbird. They're known for being a little out of the ordinary Baptist church. In fact, they were kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention for being a little different. Whether that's good or bad, you make your own decision. Yeah. But they were kicked out. And they have a sign in front of their church that came out, I think at the beginning of Lent, actually. I've seen it recently, that says thinking and feeling and healing. I thought, well, that'll preach, right? Spirituality is about thinking, right? Not being led blindly. It is though about feeling, right? Not like a robot, do's and don'ts, but feeling your way through. And it is ultimately about healing. The cross wasn't a very comfortable experience. Granted, Jesus died on a cross, so there's no need for us to. I'm certainly not suggesting that you become a martyr, that you climb up on a cross. It's been done already. No need for you to beat yourself up. You know, that's often the challenge of speaking to a collective group, because no doubt there are people in the group who probably need a little beating up. You know, the kind of, in any general group, not just this one, there are people who probably think a little too highly of themselves. And there are also people in the group who really struggle with always beating themselves up. And so you have to balance both when you're speaking to a group. So there's probably some of us in the room that have a little sense of entitlement, you know. And there are probably some of us in the room, including me, who have struggled your whole life with feeling good enough. And that's not your issue. So no matter where you fall on the spectrum, I'm not suggesting that you become a martyr, but I think what Jesus models for us is the process of emptying ourselves of ego and self-importance, that we might put on the garments of humility, compassion, and empathy. This can be done, this emptying process can be done through acts of worship and discipleship, or it can also happen through ego-crushing, heart-breaking circumstances and experiences. At any rate, in order for us to be filled with God, we must empty ourselves of the junk taking up valuable space. So this morning, I was looking over the lesson like I do every Sunday morning before I come. No, it doesn't seem like it, but I do prepare, I promise. I really do. I put some effort into it. And I had a trigger. I just kind of sensed the warm spring day, and it made me think about my grandmother. So a year ago, today I was saying goodbye to her for the last time. She died on April 1st, but it was, of course, the way the calendar works. She died on a Monday, so it would have been a Sunday. I was in the hospital telling her goodbye. And I began to think, what does that mean? What's this feeling, right? What's this feeling that I'm getting? And it came to me, I was telling my brother this as I was driving here, it came to me that some of you may not know, my mother was a drug addict growing up. And you just never knew. There's a volatility with addiction, and you just never knew what the next day was going to bring. And so in some ways, things that trigger for me in my life is that I feel like I'm a 7-year-old scared kid. If I was just very transparent and honest about that. And I get this feeling, right? And I can't explain it. What I have learned to do, thank God, is self-reflect about it and not let it drive me to make bad decisions. Because in the past, I'd go buy a car that I didn't need to buy. Or I'd go do something. I'd go speed in that car and get a ticket, Or I would do something in my youth that just really wasn't very helpful or very healthy because I didn't know what to do with what I was feeling. Now I have learned to be self-reflective about it. What's going on? What's this feeling? And this morning I realized that that's what my grandmother represented for me, was security and safeness. She was so boring that her consistency, right? And my brother and I were laughing about that this morning. If it wasn't work, church, or home, and there'd be a time or two growing up. At one point I said, I can't live with my mother. I'm living with my grandmother. I can't do that. Which hurt my mother's feelings. But I think she now understands. But at the time, she would say, oh, why do you always choose your grandmother over me? And for a child, that's really hard, to be told you don't love me enough. Why don't you? She was just a mess. She's a beautiful human being today. God can work miracles. But at the time, she was just a mess. And so I remember my grandmother telling me at times, you're not my husband. I don't have to report into you. Because if she wasn't where she was supposed to be, oh my gosh, where is she?
Yeah.
She's supposed to be at home. Why isn't she at home, right? And as a kid, she'd say, would you calm down? Went out to eat with one of the ladies from church, whatever the case may be. But her consistency provided such security for me. And when I think about her being gone, there's a little boy in me that has to think, who's going to make me feel safe? And I have to empty myself. This is what it was coming full circle for me. I have to empty myself of those memories, of that need for another human being to make me feel safe. And I need to go deeper and know that in God's love, I am safe. In God's love, I am secure. And another human being can't do that for me. Though I am eternally grateful for my grandmother for doing that for me. But it's time to grow up, right? I can't have her make me feel safe anymore. And so as we move through, I want to lift up to you Matthew 16 and 24. Then Jesus told his disciples, if any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. As much as I believe in God's abundance and grace and love and healing and empowerment, I also know that there is no resurrection without crucifixion. There is no Easter without Good Friday. It was a few years ago, I was sitting in a Sunday service on Easter, and the pastor brought this up, that, oftentimes we misinterpret the bad times. Can life never be good without tragedy and pain? Well, no, of course. I believe that life can be good and abundant and beautiful. But sometimes when bad things inevitably happen, sometimes we have to look beyond the angst that we're feeling in the present moment and know that at times good can come of it. Not that God sent it, but if we learn how to reinterpret it, good can come. We can learn something, even from the most difficult times in life. And as I was sitting there and the pastor was saying this, I thought, this was maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. I thought, the crucifixion was my grandmother's brain aneurysm when she became ill. And she had a long illness, some of you know, 7 years of being bedridden. Just heartbreaking. But of all of my grandmother's children, the renegade, which was my mother, came home to take care of her. She was living in California at the time, and she moved home. And it was through that caretaking, literally being trapped in a house, in this caretaking where she had to feed and clothe and bathe another human being, she became clean and sober. And her life, and she would then begin to call me crying, Mother, what is wrong? I have not had a clear head in years. Now that I'm sober, I was a horrible parent. I am so sorry. I'm first time I've been able to feel anything, because I've been numbing out for years and years. And so it dawned on me that grandmother's illness was a crucifixion in our life. Mm-hmm. But mother, sobriety is the resurrection. There's all kinds of things that occur in our life to empty us, right? Of whatever the stuff is. For quite literally, for my mother, whatever this thing that fueled her drug addiction. That crucifixion of having to care for her mother in this state helped empty her of whatever that was. It helped heal our family relationship and the relationship between my mother and my brother and I. It was hard, it was difficult. I wouldn't want to do it again, and I would not have chosen it. But I accept the blessing that comes with it. Can life never be good without tragedy and pain? Well, no, of course not. However, please know that there are some things that can only be seen with eyes that have been watered with tears. There are some things that can only be seen with eyes that have been watered with tears. My grieving process with my grandmother has been an emptying. Grief is an emptying process. And I have learned not to try to be the tough guy. And if I need to cry, I just, so I had my little moment when I kind of came to the understanding of what all was happening. Then I got in the shower, and then I thought about, I would have saying goodbye to her about this time last year, and I just, drowning in snot. I was just, right? But this grieving has made me so empathetic. It's made me so sensitive to the pain of other people. And it's just kind of a natural thing. Your grandparents die. Everybody in here has experienced it. It's not unusual. It's not like it's something special. But God has used it, and I have accepted it to be an emptying process for me. That old memories and old things and anxiety and old ways of thinking or whatever else that's got me all filled up that I need to get rid of so that I can be filled with God's Spirit. I'm willing to do that. Amen.